Transphobia seems to be a mainstay of the British media, whether it's in our newspapers or our daytime telly. It's almost impossible to avoid the trans debate. Rishi Sunak's transphobic jokes to J.K. Rowling speaking out is clearly prominent in the public eye, despite the trans community making up less than 1% of the population. In this documentary, I want to discuss the British media and how it impacts both the perception of the trans community and the lives of the trans community.
A man is a man and a woman is a woman.
I identify as a black lesbian.
Off the bat, I want to acknowledge my potential biases. I am left-wing, I support Labour, I support the LGBT community and the trans community. I think we should start off by talking about the government. First off, how do you legally change your gender? There are 7 requirements, so you need a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria, a medical report that says any medical treatment you've received, proof that you've lived as your chosen gender for at least 2 years, a statutory declaration that you plan to live as the gender until death, the consent of their spouse if they're married, a fee of £140, and the submission of this document to a panel. This system is inherently difficult and, in my opinion, outdated. In the summer 2022, the Scottish Government passed a gender recognition reform bill. This was a massive thing for the trans community as it allowed them to identify as their chosen gender without needing a gender dysphoria diagnosis. It skips years and years of waiting for treatment. At the Northern Gender Dysphoria Clinic, there's a waiting list of over 5 years. And that's just for the first appointment, not the diagnosis, just the first appointment. This bill will have saved the NHS time, money and mental health of the trans community. However, the government blocked it for what Stonewall says is the first time this has ever been done under Section 35 of the Scotland Act. This action harms a minority, making up 0.29 to 0.74% of the UK population. And this isn't the only time that Rishi Sunak has done something transphobic. PinkNews leaked a video of him mocking trans people.
You may have noticed Ed Davey has been very busy. He was busy trying to convince everybody that women clearly had penises.
And they did it a second time, this time at a Tory conference.
They shouldn't get bullied into believing that people can be any sex they want to be. They can't. A man is a man and a woman is a woman. That's just common sense.
These are 2 instances of him outwardly mocking trans people. One at the expense of both a politician and also minimising the trans community just to their genitals. And the second at first glance, it could seem common sense, right? But what he's effectively saying is that males are men and females are women. He is dismissing all the research into gender as a sociological construct, all of the research on gender identity, and he's making discrimination against this community a focal point of the Tory party. If anything, the trans community are discriminated against and need the government's help, not to be discriminated against by their own government. In 2023, transgender hate crimes rise by 11%. Every other form of hate crime went down. This is really distressing to me, and more should be done about this by our government, by our media and by our schools. Efforts need to be made to stop this from increasing. Harry Potter is a global franchise with books, movies, games, a studio tour and rides. In 2020, the author J.K. Rowling released an opinion piece titled Speaking Out on Sex and Gender Issues. Prior to this, she had liked transphobic tweets, supported someone who lost their job for being transphobic, and even made some transphobic comments herself. This has been widely talked about by other people such as ContraPoints and Jamie Dodger, so I'm going to put their videos on screen. If you want to know more about the overall situation, you can watch their videos, but I want to talk about the overall trend in the article. Rowling claims she's a feminist when she uses sexist stereotypes in her argument against the trans community. She echoes nonsensical claims that men are inherently predators and women are inherently naive. In her article, she belittles trans men, making it out that they can't make their own choices, and she treats trans women as if they're men in a costume with sexist ideas. This, if anything, is not feminism. It is following ideas of the patriarchy, the very thing that feminism seeks to fight. It supports the idea that men are predatory and women are timid by nature, and this is simply not true. These claims are harmful not only to the trans community, but to feminism as a whole, and is taking steps backwards. News outlets aren't much of a stranger to transphobia. The book The Transgender Issue by Sean Fay discusses this, among many other topics, and calls out the newspapers, the Daily Star, the Sunday People, the Times, the Sunday Times, Metro, as well as the news shows Good Morning Britain, This Morning, Victoria, Derbyshire and Loose Women. Quote, in 2020 alone, the Times and its sister paper, the Sunday Times, between them ran over 300 articles, almost one a day on trans people. It's a very interesting book and one I would recommend picking up if you have the time or interest. Mermaids UK, a charity for trans youth and their parents, ran a study on newspapers and transphobia. Their study found that in 2018 to 2019, trans people were described as having a propensity to be offended or be involved in conflicts or trouble in 586 cases, described in the context of being demanding or aggressive 334 times, described in the context of crime either as criminals or victims of crime 608 times. Meanwhile, PinkNews, a LGBTQIA+ news organisation, released an article with 3 graphs which display the issue. One on the Daily Telegraph's coverage of trans people, one on the same with the Daily Mail, and a third showing the results of a YouGov poll on whether trans women are women. These graphs have one thing in common: they all show a negative trend. Articles are becoming progressively more frequent and more negative, and as this has happened, so has the public's view of trans people gone down. Now, there's one article that I want to talk about. This one was published by the BBC and was originally called "We're Being Pressured into Sex by Some Trans Women." This article was called out by the YouTuber Sean, who did a series on the article trying to get it taken down. While some corrections were made, a lot of the issues are still prevalent in this article. In an attempt to prove that trans women are pressuring lesbians into sex, and to prove that it isn't just isolated incidents, they referenced an article by Get the L Out, a well-known transphobic organisation. This survey is still in the article as writing, and as far as I'm aware, it still is now while recording. Because of the organisation being transphobic, it already has no weight in this article and in its argument. Get the L Out is a transphobic hate group. The survey was posted on their social media, which means that the results are guaranteed to be biased. The article says that the study claims, of the 80 women who did respond, the majority reported being pressured or coerced to accept a trans woman as a sexual partner. I want to talk about Get the L Out. At first, their attention seemed good tackling lesbophobia, but their website tells a different story. Their website is plastered in transphobia. They make claims that trans activism erases, silences, and demonises lesbians, as well as a variety of other questionable claims. They call trans women men, trans men lesbians, which isn't true because trans men can like men. Their claims give off a similar vibe to J.K. Rowling, that trans women are rapists and that trans men are naive and being tricked into transitioning. Now, based on their demographic, this makes it obvious that the survey is going to be biased from the get-go, and this is not good enough, especially from the BBC, a company who claims to be politically neutral. And this problem is no better in the TV news space. One notable instance is on GB News with Piers Morgan Uncensored, in which they do a trans debate, where not one trans person is present. Not only that, but the opposition is in favour, with 3 people against trans people and 1 person for. And the 1 person who is for trans people is very misinformed and doesn't really know what they're talking about. It starts with the Fox News host Tony Lauren claiming that wokeness started in the United States. This is flat out a lie. In 1933, the Nazi Party broke into the Institute of Sexology and burnt everything. This was all research into the LGBT+ community, as well as a variety of other things. And trans people have always existed around the world, with a quote here: "Other cultures and societies have had different ways of understanding the relationship between genitalia, reproductive capacity and social role, and do not have the same Western tradition of rigidly forcing people into the 2 categories of man and woman. Examples of third gender cultures exist around the world, such as the warrior in Indonesia, the Samoan Fa'afnin, the Hijra in India, and the Famuks of the Zapotec cultures in southern Mexico." I even have an article linked in the description by National Geographic on the subject. The episode proceeds to go on a variety of tangents that go nowhere and seek to dehumanise the trans community. They make dehumanising claims, such as,
why can't I identify as a black lesbian?
On Tuesday, you're a woman, and on Thursday, you're a pizza.
among many others. Not to mention, throughout the entire ordeal, the others speak over Angelica Marlin, the only person in support of trans people. They use an isolated incident of a trans rapist. They call letting your child identify as trans abuse, and trans people groomers. Claim transgender clinics are mutilating children irrevocably, and that 97% of the patients suffered from autism, depression or other issues, to villainise the trans community. Whilst bad, the instances of abuse and rape are isolated and make up a small percentage of trans people. Being trans doesn't make you a child groomer, and having a trans child doesn't make you abusive. And trans clinics do not mutilate children. Quote, children under 18 never have genital surgeries in the UK. Young trans children prior to puberty only ever transition socially, which is changing names, pronouns and clothes or hairstyles. Overall, the debate is filled with misinformation and hate speech, although honestly, what did we expect from the British equivalent of Fox News? The TV and film space isn't safe either. Prominently is the episode The Speech from the IT Crowd. Whilst the main story of the episode is quite funny, with Jen and the internet like the box internet, and follows usual sitcom hijinks, the B plot follows the boss of the company and a trans woman in a relationship. The gag throughout the episode is that the boss doesn't realise that April is trans. April shows off traditionally masculine traits throughout the episode, and Doug loves her. Early on in the episode, she tells him,
I used to be a man, Douglas.
but he mishears this as she used to be from Iran. He brushes it off, thinking it's fine that she is from Iran. Towards the end of the episode, she corrects him, saying that,
"No, not Iran, a man. I said I used to be a man."
Doug freaks out about this and they end up having a fight, and it's just not good. And then this is where the B plot and the A plot merge, with Doug throwing April through a window and her breaking the internet. In my opinion, this was a transphobic episode, and Channel 4 seemed to agree with me. They pulled the episode from their streaming site, All 4. This transphobia is no surprise if you know the creator behind the IT Crowd, Graham Linehan. His Twitter is plastered in transphobia. From his own tweets, his retweets and his likes. Other shows in the public eye that I believe promote transphobia are The League of Gentlemen with the character Babs, and Little Britain with too many examples to count. I wanted to know what the trans community thought about this, so I interviewed them to get their opinions. What would you say the British media's portrayal of the trans community is like?
Especially in recent years, it's been overly negative. I think the media tends to show quite a skewed, especially like right-wing spaces. I think there's quite a negative reception to trans people, especially with like new issue these days, like kind of like gender darkens. People are like, oh, they're going to be corrupting our children, but I think it feels like quite a skewed perception of what opinions of trans people are overall.
The press or news outlets tend to be quite misinformed and misrepresent minorities. I think it's pretty poor, to put it nicely. We're normally used as a scapegoat. Most aspects of trans portrayal that I've seen over the past years have been primarily negative, like mainstream media. It's very, like, polarizing. It portrays it as epidemic, and it portrays it as like something that's widespread, new phenomenon from like woke culture, when, you know, let's be honest, woke culture isn't even really a thing. Like fear-mongering, like they have with like every other like minority group.
Do you believe that the media is responsible for the increase in transphobia over the last few years?
I think it's the attention that it's getting that has really led to trans issues being talked about more, and that obviously means that there's going to be a lot more negative reception. I believe that like transphobia and like trans issues are more talked about these days because this seems to be the issue of the day. Whether it's like just the media is another question, but I do think it correlates.
A lot of sitcoms in the last couple of decades have tackled queer themes very insensitively, and has produced the ideas that trans people are not trustworthy or something to be made fun of.
I don't think it's fully responsible. There's like other factors like politics and stuff, and politicians, the media definitely doesn't help, and there's many issues with what they say that gets brought up in life as well. Media is primarily negative. It is, you know, demonizing people. It is like implying that they're a danger to people, that we're a danger to people, we're a danger to women in women's spaces. I think that has definitely influenced a lot of people towards maybe from like a more neutral stance towards a bit more of a negative one. There's no way that it's not. People have gotten more for the side so dehumanizing horrible transphobic things, not just about trans people, but like every minority group. The British media, it's both like horror stories about trans people. They'll pick the most like 1 out of 100, you know, kind of case ever, and they'll use that as like their main idea of that group.
Is there any examples of transphobia in the British media that stand out to you?
There's obviously Rishi Sunak, right? When he gave that speech, that horrible speech, and he was like, a man's just a man, a woman is a woman, that's just common sense. I think that was a great example of him just throwing trans people under the bus because he knows that's the issue of the day.
I think the Daily Mail, there's been such rampant transphobia in the media, it's like jarring. When stories get built up and fabricated, like a lot of the time you'll see like a headline like teacher fired for misgendering student, but if you read more into it, there's often a lot more than it just like a teacher said she instead of he. Like it's always a lot more than what they make it out to seem. Like radio debates like you know, trans rights, they'll always be like, oh, do trans people deserve rights? Like, do they deserve basic human rights? And it's like, the radio host will act like it's the most like insane thing ever that someone wants to not be hate crime. The person like defending it, if there is anyone, you know, on the other side, will always be made out to be like, oh, like insane. But oh, they're so crazy for wanting rights.
What would you like to see change in the British media to do with trans people?
I would like to see an increase in representation, just in general. I honestly don't really care if it is still negative, with negative connotations, as long as there is also positive representation or positive connotations. A recent example of really good representation is Doctor Who's episode The Star Beast featuring Desmond Finney. All the human element of her story was really, really well written, and yeah, it was very touching.
I wish more corporations would use their platform to educate the public about minorities.
A shift from a negative portrayal of like trans people in general, like a potentially change in the way headlines are like phrased, and reporting on trans people as you would report on any other member of the country. So not even like trans people in the back, just not active transphobia and inciting bigotry and shit.
Thank you to those who let me interview them, and hopefully it provides a bit of insight. I want to wrap this all up neatly. Now, I believe that the media is in some way partially responsible for the public's view of the trans community. After all, outside of schools, it's the main way that people get their information. And let's be honest, the average person is expected to read scientific studies or do research on everything. So what do we do here? I don't think there is a right answer. I believe that first we need to better educate our population on the trans community and what being transgender actually is. It was barely covered when I was in secondary school, and during that lesson we had to debate whether trans people deserved rights. We could have stricter regulations from news outlets on hate speech, misinformation, and the trans community. We could promote citing sources and checking that they're credible. A practice that should be done anyway. More positive representation in TV and film would be nice. And by that I don't mean good characters in the sense of good and evil. I mean characters that are well written and human. Characters which aren't transphobic or follow stereotypes. We're starting to see this in British telly with Yasmin Finney in both Heartstopper and the new Doctor Who specials. The news needs to report on actual issues that trans community face, such as hate crime, discrimination and poverty. And us as the general public need to hold these companies responsible for their actions. We should call out bigotry and misinformation and let them know that it isn't acceptable. And this fight needs to continue until not just the trans community but all minorities are equal and normalised both legally and socially.